Hello everyone, and welcome to Scary Story. Tonight I have a tale for you that will make you question every shadow you see, every flicker in the corner of your eye. It's a story about a man named Alex and the creeping darkness that began to follow him. It all started on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary that its memory would later seem like a cruel joke. Alex was walking home from his office, a routine he'd followed for years. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. As he turned onto his street, a quiet lane lined with old oak trees, he noticed it for the first time. His own shadow, stretched out long and thin before him, seemed off. It was darker than it should be, a pool of absolute black that seemed to absorb the light around it. He paused, tilting his head. For a fleeting moment, the shadow's head seemed to turn independently of his own. He shook his head, blaming it on fatigue and the tricks of the fading light. He was just tired. That's all it was. The next day, as he was making coffee in his kitchen, he saw it again. The bright morning sun streamed through the window, casting his silhouette onto the tiled floor. He reached for a mug, and his shadow mimicked the movement, but it was just a beat too slow, a fraction of a second behind his own action. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He tried to ignore it, telling himself he was being ridiculous. Shadows don't have a will of their own. They're just an absence of light. But the feeling of being watched, of not being truly alone, began to settle over him like a shroud. Over the following week, the occurrences became more frequent, more undeniable. While he was reading in his favorite armchair, he would glance down to see the shadow on the wall behind him shifting, its fingers elongating and curling as if testing its own form, even as he sat perfectly still. Once, while driving, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the driver's side window. His own face was there, but behind him, in the driver's seat, his shadow's head was turned, looking directly back at him with an emptiness that was more terrifying than any face. He slammed on the brakes, his heart hammering against his ribs. There was nothing in the back seat, but the image was seared into his mind. Sleep offered no escape. His nights were plagued by nightmares of a dark, featureless figure standing at the foot of his bed, its presence suffocating him. He'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in a cold sweat, his eyes darting to the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest. He started leaving all the lights on, hoping to banish the darkness, but it was useless. The shadow was always there, tethered to him, a constant, silent companion. It became bolder. It would subtly alter its shape, its edges growing sharper, more defined. It seemed to be gaining substance. Alex's friends and family started to notice the change in him. He became withdrawn, jumpy, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. "You look exhausted," his sister told him over the phone. "Is everything okay?" How could he explain it? How could he tell them he was being haunted by his own shadow without them thinking he was losing his mind? He felt completely isolated, trapped in a waking nightmare that only he could see. He tried to prove it to himself, to catch it in the act. He set up a camera in his living room, pointing it at a blank wall where he would stand. He spent an hour standing perfectly still, then moving, then standing still again. He eagerly played back the footage, his hands trembling. On the screen he saw himself, a nervous, fidgeting man, and there on the wall was his shadow. It mimicked his every move perfectly. There was no delay, no independent twitch, no strange elongation. It was just a normal shadow. A wave of confusion and self-doubt washed over him. Was he really going mad? Was this all a product of stress and a lack of sleep? For a moment he felt a sliver of relief. Maybe it was all in his head. He turned off the camera and walked towards the kitchen to get a glass of water. As he passed a hallway mirror, he glanced at his reflection. His own tired face looked back at him. And behind his reflection, standing just over his shoulder, was the shadow. It wasn't on the wall behind him. It was in the mirror, separate from him. It slowly raised a hand, not mimicking him, but acting on its own. And it smiled. It was a lipless, predatory grin that stretched across its featureless face, a smile of pure malice and triumph, and panic seized Alex in its icy grip. He stumbled backward, away from the mirror, his breath catching in his throat. He ran to his front door, fumbling with the locks. He had to get out. He had to get away. He threw the door open and burst out into the night, not caring where he was going. only that he was running from the thing that wore his shape. He ran for blocks, his lungs burning, the sound of his own ragged breaths filling his ears. He didn't dare look back. He didn't want to see if the shadow was still attached to his heels, or worse, running beside him. He finally collapsed in a small deserted park, his body giving out. He lay on the damp grass, staring up at the starless, city-lit sky. For a few minutes there was nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat slowly returning to normal. Maybe he'd lost it. Maybe he'd finally escaped. He slowly, cautiously, pushed himself up to a sitting position. He looked down at the ground beside him. There was no shadow. The ambient light from the street lamps was too diffuse to cast a strong one. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in his chest. He was free. But then a voice whispered from right beside him. It was a dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves scraping across pavement. "You can't run from me." Alex's blood ran cold. He turned his head slowly. Sitting on the grass next to him, legs crossed just as his were, was the shadow. It wasn't a flat projection on the ground anymore. It had peeled itself away from the two-dimensional world. It was a three-dimensional being of pure, solid darkness, featureless except for the void-like spaces where its eyes should be. "I'm tired of just following," it rasped, its voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I want to lead." The dark figure reached out a hand, its form wavering like heat haze. Alex tried to scramble away, but his limbs wouldn't obey. He was paralyzed with a primal fear he had never known was possible. The shadow's hand touched his chest. There was no physical sensation, just an invasive, soul-deep cold that seemed to extinguish the very core of his being. The world began to fade, the dim lights of the park, the distant sounds of the city, his own sense of self. All of it was being sucked into the encroaching void. His last conscious thought was not one of fear, but of a strange, horrifying understanding. The shadow wasn't a separate entity that had attached itself to him. It had always been a part of him, a dark, patient part, waiting for its turn in the light. The next morning, a man who looked exactly like Alex walked out of the park. His posture was perfect, his step confident. He whistled a cheerful, tuneless melody as he walked down the street. When the morning sun hit him, it cast a shadow on the pavement behind him. It was a perfectly normal shadow. It was faint, indistinct, and followed his every move with perfect, mindless obedience. The man glanced down at it, and a small, knowing smile touched his lips. A smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was finally leading, and his old self was now where it belonged, trapped in the dark, following silently behind. Thank you for listening to tonight's scary story. If you enjoyed this journey into the darkness, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more unsettling tales. What did you think of Alex's fate? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, be careful and maybe don't look too closely at your own shadow. Stay safe.